Welcome back to the Boom Bust channel. I'm your host Terry, and today doing the editorial talking about how to fix college football. So, if you've been around the channel, you might have heard before I did this topic and I've talked about my actual thoughts, and you can check that out because I think the true way to fix college sports in general is to separate college from sports. Now, for a lot of reasons, that probably is not realistic. I don't think that will happen. And so that would probably be my first idea. But like I said, because of the amount of money, because of the politics, that probably isn't going to happen. I do believe that we got to a point that college and sports are pretty much separate, especially depending on which sport you look at, because the college obviously exists to educate and to be in higher education, while the NCAA is more of a private entity looking for revenue. And those two don't always mix, they don't always coincide. I believe, especially when we're talking about football, which is a gateway to a lucrative sport. Obviously, not every sport goes into a lucrative professional sport, but football does. And I believe it should be treated like a lot of other countries treat it, which it should be an amateur sport. It should be something that is developmental, much like the NBA quietly adopted the G League, and we just saw the first draft where a number of the top picks were from the G League instead of from college. And we expect that to continue as college basketball continues to lose this kind of allure. And then on the same side, I feel like football not only should give an alternative, but I feel like it should separate completely. And I've said this before, again, you can check it out. But in a nutshell, I just believe that the two don't go together. I am somebody that works in higher education. I've worked in K through 12 education. And I don't see the two combining. I do on some levels, but not to the point that it's become now where it's a completely capitalist adventure. So if that is the case, and people want to make money and they want to develop to get ready for the NFL, and they don't want to, we're having people lie about classes, we having scandals, people doing homework, all this stuff. We don't need to do that. We don't need to disrupt education to facilitate this amateur sport. So I feel like it should be separated. And I talked about this a little bit in my editorial about the development of the quarterback in the NFL. It could help on a lot of fronts. It helps the NFL, but it also helps the college players. Again, make it much like other European and other countries do it, where if it's going to be developmental, it's developmental. And I don't feel necessarily that you have to create something different. As I talked about, Ed McCaffrey and his group was talking about creating something. But I think right now we have the USFL and the XFL merging. It could all be folded into each other. Now that means the NCAA disappears. That means a lot of jobs, a lot of money off the cow is gone. But I think that honestly is the right thing to do. And then we separate it. If people really felt for some reason that it had to be attached to college and they did talk all that, then you need to be renting the college, much like anything else in today's age. Like their likeness, their mascot, their fields, they do have that. So rent it from them. There needs to be a separate entity, whether it's the NCAA or whatever. It needs to be a separate entity that pays the colleges, and we'll get into it later, because the colleges do not get as much money as people think. And so they should be paying the colleges to rent that, and they should be almost a host for the team. And if a new team wants to come in and switch it up, then we could do that. And I know it sounds crazy to people, But that's why I advocate that we just completely separate. However, as I said, because there's so much money involved, because there's so much politics involved, and the biggest thing that people got to realize, the reason why the NCAA and college and sports keep intermingling is because you have a built-in captive audience revenue stream, and that is the alumni. You have alumni who have affinity towards this institution, not towards a player, not even necessarily towards a team, but because the institution has built affinity, and you graduate these people who go on to make a lot of money and they want to give money back, you have a built-in captive audience for fundraising. And that is the number one reason why you don't, or not you, but the powers that be don't want to see a separation between college and sports. But that's my number one thing. But again, you can go check that out. I've talked about that before. So let's get to the actual discussion. How do we revamp and how do we change? How do we fix the current state of college sports? For me, I broke it down into two areas. I broke it down into the level of commitment, and I broke it down into the payment. So we'll jump into the payment first and knock that out. The biggest thing, obviously, right now, the concern, whether it be Nick Saban or other coaches leaving, they talk about the students and NIL money. The name, image, likeness, they're making money now. Is one way, I should say, essentially for the player to make money, which we've been waiting for, or not we, but a lot of people have been waiting for a way for students to make money, student athletes. And so a lot of coaches feels like it's just out of control. That's all the players are talking about. So I would say this. Number one, I think this is a simple fix. You need to have an outside entity, a third party that has fiduciary responsibility. Much like a lot of colleges and their employees, and I'm sure other entities as well, they find outside financial businesses to run their retirement and all that different stuff. And I think that's really the similar idea that we have here, is you need to have an outside entity that handles all of this money. And essentially what we would do is they would manage the NIL money for each player that goes into an account, like a CD or whatever type of form of payment that's not liquid, and it accrues money. And then as a player, you get access to that money once your eligibility expires or you forego it. So obviously, if you go into the draft early and you get drafted, you forego your eligibility. Once your eligibility runs out, whether you go to the NFL or not, that's when you have access to that money. So the money is not direct, it's not liquid, it's not under the table, it's none of that. It is whatever NIL money that's above table is managed through this company and put into accounts where players can't access it liquid, and then they also gain some money. So if you stay in the college for 4 years, whatever, hopefully you gain a little bit of money on that as well. And then, to be honest, with the NCAA, they probably could get some deal where they can get a better interest rate where that accrues a little faster. So I think that's number one. Now, does that completely eliminate the thing? No, because I do think a lot of coaches, and again, this is coming from a coach, a player that has access to his money, like, even though this is a little different, but like a Shedeur Sanders, where they worried about putting up the watch and wearing the chain and stuff. Absolutely, that changes the focus and everything. Now, people will say people in the NFL do it and they worry, blah, blah. I get it. This is me and my personal opinion and my personal perspective from somebody that works in college development, working with developing with young kids, has worked with high school kids. That's not what you want to do. You don't want to put it in the parents' hands or guardians' hands, because obviously we know that doesn't always work the best. But put this in the student's name, the student athlete, and have them have access to it later. Or if you truly just want the money for security and all that, you are building that up, but you have access to it later, so you're not tempted or worried about spending that money just to flash right now. And I think that's the number one thing. Or not number one, but that's one of the things. The number one thing that I do believe has been the issue for so long is the discrepancy in pay. So because you have these coaches making so much money, everybody's looking like, yo, the players that are generating the money, they're not really getting that, and that's the problem. And so for me, I think there needs to be a redistribution. Again, I work in higher ed. I understand how these systems work. I'm not going to say I'm an expert, but I understand. Essentially, you have these teams working as an auxiliary unit of the college. So think about it like housing, where I worked for a little bit. You have these residence halls, people call them dorms, and you have this housing. They make money, but their budget is completely built, for the most part, off their revenue, because they're an auxiliary. They're not part of the core educational landscape. So that means we kind of work like almost like a hotel on campus. So the money we make from whatever we do, whether it's bringing in students to live here, how much they pay, whether it's renting out our property over the summer for conferences or camps, whatever money we bring in, that's what generates our budget. And it's similar for the sporting teams. So while a lot of people feel like, oh, this, Alabama makes so much money and that goes straight to the school, it doesn't. Most of the money stays with the program because they operate like an auxiliary or something that's a little bit outside of the core college. And so from what I've seen, most colleges don't see that money. The big draw for the college is that, oh, that brings attention. It's free marketing. And so people apply. One example I could give for people that are around Chicago, if you saw Loyola, when their men's basketball team had a big run for a few years, they saw an increase in applications. And so people think you're getting millions and millions of dollars to the school. Not really. Mostly you get attention to the school, and that's kind of the give and take. But that's not enough. To me, I think it's ridiculous, and I think it's a very easy change. You should have that money going directly to the school and then being redistributed through the budgets from the presidents or the chancellor or whoever is in charge. That should come from their office. And so for me, I think that, again, let's just say coaches were making a minimal salary. Like, let's just say coaches were making $60,000 at max. We would not have as much, talk about player payment as we have. The problem is that if you are successful in terms of not only winning, but obviously once you win, you get alumni, and again, those dollars come to you, and you get TV deals, all that stuff. That's when the program gets to say, we're going to take all this money and do it how we want. We're going to build these lavish facilities. We're going to do whatever we want, because they're taking the bulk of the money. Now, what happens is, and again, I'm not an expert, but from what I understand in law with Title IX, is that you can't just give all the money to one program. You have to spread it out somewhat equally. And so, because, whether that's men's sports or women's sports, whatever. And so what I believe is what has to happen is you have to make a distinction, whatever the number is, of a percentage from earned revenue that goes back to the program. And so whatever that number is, and I don't know the research, but I'm gonna just throw out a random number. Let's say 45%. So if I'm Alabama football and we bring in this much revenue, we generate this much revenue, 45% of that comes back to us. Discretionary funds, we could move that around how we want. We could spend it on recruitment, coach salaries, we could spend that on facilities, however we want. But it is giving it a limit. I know it's not going to be 100%. And again, I don't know what the number is, but it's not 100%. It might not even be 40%, but for whatever the research tells you makes sense, that needs to be guaranteed to come back to the program. The rest of the money needs to go to the school to distribute. Now, if the school wants to distribute it to other sports programs, if they want to distribute it to other things on campus, that's up to them. Because if you're one of those people that say my first thought doesn't work, you can't separate college from sports. Colleges is the main thing. Then put your money where your mouth is, literally. If colleges are the main thing, they should be distributing the money. And so I feel like you have tens of thousands of students, captive audience, but mostly the importance is they're going to go on to hopefully become very impactful donors. So if we're driving the bus, why is it that these students get to stay in housing that isn't up to code or isn't up to par for 2024? Why is it that these students don't have quality meal options? Why is it that their learning in their classrooms aren't upgraded? The money should be going to the school, and that might be my biased opinion because I work in higher ed, but it should be. I don't understand why we have a system set up now where the money doesn't go to the school. I mean, I get it, because capitalism and that's how people act, but to fix it, you would redistribute a lot of money. So what would happen? A lot of money would shrink towards the program, but you would still get, I think, a fair amount of the money, and you decide how you want to use it. But coaching salaries would definitely shrink. These facilities definitely shrink. But the schools would strengthen. And again, if you're one of those people that say you have to have college connected to sports, then the colleges need to be strengthened. They're fighting for their lives. A lot of colleges are fighting for their lives right now. And so why is it that the students that bring in money and eventually become alumni to bring in money, why is it that they have to take less than if these athletes aren't? So that's that. I think you redistribute some of the money that's going around and you put it back into the colleges. And honestly, the coaches are the number one focus. But the truth is, this is a cash cow that everybody's eating off of. Everybody looks at the coaches, but nobody really looks at the NCAA and their board of directors or whoever runs it. Nobody looks at the commissioners for each conference. Nobody looks at the directors for each bowl game. Nobody looks at the quote-unquote selection committee. Look at how much money they're making. This is a cash cow, which is why I think it should be completely dismantled. But if you're going to keep it, it's not just money going to the coaches, it's money going to a lot of people. That needs to be reconfigured. And again, it needs to be stated as a specific percentage. If your sport, whatever your sport brings in generated revenue, you get X percent across the board. Every sport gets the same percent. That makes it even and fair. And that controls the narrative of the college getting certain money and the players not. So that's what I would say. So that's payment. So the second issue is commitment to the program. And these might be drastic, and I don't know all of this, but this is what I'm going to say. So the coaching carousel, from what I understand now, there's no timeline, but what you need to do is define a timeline, a coaching carousel timeline. So for example, Right now, with the expanded playoffs, it's going to end January 20th. I would say February 1st starts the coaching carousel. So if you are under contract for the next academic season, football season, whatever, you can only make a move to a different team within these 2 weeks, unless you get fired. If you get fired outside of these 2 weeks, that's different. But if you are under contract, you can only move during these 2 weeks. So we need to make a controlled time where coaches can move. Now, February is right around, we're getting close to the Super Bowl. So most of the teams in the NFL have already decided on their coaching staffs. So if you want to jump to the NFL, you can. Outside of this 2 weeks, obviously you could jump to the NFL. We can't control that. But as far as the NCAA, coaches can only move within this 2 weeks. So once these 2 weeks are done, you know where coaches are for the year. If they don't end up coaching, or if whatever, they can only coach at that school. If they get fired, that's a different story. So the second thing, I want to shrink the transfer portal to 1 week. I'm not an expert on the transfer portal. I don't know, but I know one of the issues that people are concerned with are multiple transfers and all that stuff. So we're going to shrink it to 1 week. You have 2 weeks of the coaching carousel, 1 week of a rest period, and that's when players get to declare for the portal. So if you're not declared for the portal by the Friday after the coaching carousel ends, you can't transfer. Once that happens, the last week of February, that would be the transfer portal. And so what we want to do is minimize time for people to flip-flop. We want to minimize time for people to make NIL deals and all that different stuff. We want to really shrink it down. So yes, the coaches can move around, but not whenever they want to. The players can move around, but not whenever they want to. We're going to make it a finite time so everybody's working off of that. The second thing, I know there are scholarship limits, but it's complicated and people play around with it. I would make it very simple if it's not. I would say that you have a limited number of full scholarships and you have a limited number of partial scholarships. And the minimum for a partial scholarship is 50%. So if you're a walk-on, you don't have no money, but you're on partial, 50% of everything, and full scholarship. That's it. And then if you have a commitment from a player and they decommit, then you lose that scholarship spot. If you have a scholarship commitment, obviously, you lose that scholarship spot for the year. So you'll have it back next year, but for that year, it's not like, okay, they commit, they leave, that's open again. No, you lose that spot. And then I would institute 2 types of commitment. You have a soft commitment. So if a player has a soft commitment to a school, then they decommit, they cannot accept any NIL money from that school for that year. So if I'm like, hey, I'm going to go to Miami, soft commit, full scholarship, and I decommit and I say, never mind, I'm actually going to go to Florida State, I cannot accept any NIL money from Florida State in their, I can't accept any NIL money, actually, period, for that year. So if you do a hard commit, and you decommit, that means you can't enter the transfer portal that year. I don't know why that phrase is kicking my butt. Transfer portal. But you can't enter that. So if I hard commit to Michigan, and then I say, you know what, I'm actually decommit and go to Ohio State, I got to stay Ohio State for 2 years, because I can't enter the portal after my freshman year. So now there's there's a penalty for the school where you got to really decide. You can't just hand out commitments. Do you really want to commit to this student? What level do you want to commit to this student? Or what level do they want to commit? What level of scholarship do you want to commit? So if I see a 5-star receiver, he comes to campus, I'm like, hey, we got a long shot to get this guy. Am I going to say, hey, full scholarship, and he's going to say hard commit? If we do that, I lose a full scholarship spot, and he loses a year in the portal if he decommits or if he doesn't come. So that's going to make both sides think twice. And then I would definitely move up the commitment deadline. So you don't have this super long deadline. I don't know what the current one is. Again, I'm not an expert. But you don't have a super long deadline to commit to a school. You got a finite time, whatever they determine is best. Let's just say it's 3 weeks, whatever. Not 3 weeks, but whatever the deadline is. You move it way up, make it short, and students or student athletes, they got to commit to that. So again, you have to make a decision as a player. You can't be on national TV talking about I'm going to Colorado, and then a week later talking about actually I'm switching here, they offer me more money. No, we're not doing that. If you commit, if you soft commit, you're not getting NIL money. Now, if you hard commit and you say, okay, now I got this school offering me 2 times NIL money. That's more important to me, but now I got to commit to the school for 2 years. That's what we want. And you probably maybe need if you hard commit, there's, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think that works, but it's checks and balances, and really, that's what I was going to say. A player should have a certain amount of commitments, so maybe like 2 or 3, and so you can't flip all the time. But to me, I feel like you just need to really narrow the window for a lot of these things, so that people don't have all day to make last minute decisions. And then for the payment, we just got to restructure how that goes. And I want to mention, I do think that comes from federal legislation, because education institutions are a part of the country. They're a public good. It's not a private business, even though people act like they are. And so federal legislation has to step in, which they don't love to do, but they have to step in and make these determinations so that everybody's operating off the same rules. So to me, again, that's my second choice of how to fix NCAA. I think that'll fix a lot of issues. But my first choice is to separate and just make it, whatever you want to call this league, the XFL, the USFL, whatever you want to call it, make it that. Go there, get paid. Use that money, take classes if you really want to. If you don't, whatever. Play against grown men, play against other good competition, and then go to the draft. We don't need this fake NCAA college thing. So that's it for me. Go down in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Share it around, get the conversation started. And thank you for listening.